Alex and Chris saying, here's a new song, and it was, I don't know if they actually had the title at that point, but it was Ballad of El Goodo, and how it came together. And but I was just one thing I was always astonished at how that the songs they came up with, and even post #1 record and stuff with Alex, but how they connected with me, because we'd primarily been a cover band, and James Gang and Led Zeppelin and Beatles and stuff, and here songs were being written by Alex and Chris and Andy as well, and there was this great emotional connection with me there too. So that was a gas, but I just remember that one moment. But I think Andy actually came up with the title of Ballad of El Goodo.
What's really surprising is how well, you got a couple of really alpha guys here, and guys whose talents run along very similar lines, and yet, at least the period you're talking about there, they work together very, very seamlessly. I don't recall ever sensing a whole lot of conflict and or anything like that. It was like everybody was pushing forward for this common objective, which was to get this album built and engineered and performed and released. And I think that's really interesting. A lot of people, when you talk to them, you do interviews and stuff, people are looking for there to have been a lot of conflict and a lot of difficulties and stuff like that, and I never got that at all. Did you?
Would you see competition though? I mean, if one brought in a great song, 2 weeks later the next one's gonna, was there?
Well, that's good competition.
Oh, I know. That's the best.
There was probably some of that.
That was probably.
That's what I think.
But didn't you come up with the title Ballad of El Goodo?
Yeah, I don't remember what caused that. All those
I
crazy
can't imagine
titles
Chris
we
or
came up
Alex
with.
coming up with that, but I can imagine you coming up with
Yeah,
that.
I think I did.
John, and so much of the credit for all three of the Big Star records, in terms of the way they sound and what the guys learned in terms of the studio has to go to John. And John, talk a little bit about, the sound of those records. I think why they've endured and why, people are still listening to them is because they are timeless, because they still sound so fresh, ahead of its time and of its time always. Talk a little bit about, was it just being able to be in the studio so much? Because, you worked on that record, #1 record, for quite a while, and really in Chris's case was leading, and these guys was leading up to it for a number of years.
Yeah, well, Chris had a couple of tracks from the Rock City project that he did with Tom Eubanks that actually went on #1 record. And the recording school was great. I badgered these guys pretty good. They didn't just learn what button to push. It was like, this is how this kind of microphone works, and this is how the tape recorder actually works, and
The physics behind it.
Yeah. I remember the first lesson being you drew, you had some paper and you drew sound waves. It started with sound waves.
John is thorough.
That's what I'll start with. But we started #1 record at the studio we had from '66 till November of '71 on National Street, and really moved into our new purpose-built building at 2000 Madison, where we still are. We moved in November of '71, so we're kind of, pretty much through the tracking phase of the record. And, everybody always asks me about, well, how do you get a record to sound good? And I tell them, well, first of all, get some really good players, okay? Then get them to have nice instruments that are well maintained and properly set up and don't have strings that are 2 years old and drum heads that are made out of deceased cow skin, when I was first learning to record, I would scratch my head and say, why can't I get a good sound on this instrument? Then I'd go out in the studio and listen and say, oh, it's because this guy's not making a good sound. And that's kind of the first step, is it gets people to make a good sound and then do an accurate recording of that. And we're lucky to have, fairly technically advanced equipment. By the time we got to Madison Avenue, we had 3 EMTs and 3 live echo checkers, that was the reason we were able to construct some of the stuff sonically. And as Jody says, and as Andy was saying, those are the happy, optimistic times. Everybody's looking forward. Memphis music is going great guns. Stax is doing great. Our studio, full of projects. And, those are the times of optimism. And there weren't, tensions and things there. But then that all changed pretty quickly, and a lot of it was reflective of how the Memphis music scene was changing quickly.
Well, we don't want to dwell too much on the fact that obviously the Big Star, catalog, the first 2 records, which were released at the time, they connected with critics in a very big way, particularly number 1 record. And it didn't sell well for various reasons, which, to having to do more with the business stuff. But number 1 record did connect with a number of people out there, and sort of the seeds of what became the sort of cult of Big Star started to spread. And, I sort of joke that if, and I scared Chris by saying this before, that if, Big Star is kind of a religion of sorts, then Chris Stamey is kind of the Apostle Paul, because he was the first one to really understand and embrace the record, and through him and through various other people in all points in the country, it started to grow as a thing that we see come to fruition in 20 years. But Chris, talk about the first time you heard the record, and it was kind of a hit down in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, I never thought of this as a cult phenomenon. I lived on Solace Creek Parkway in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I was listening to WTOB, which was Good Guy Radio, and I just crossed over Yorkshire, and the song called When My Baby's Beside Me came on the radio. And, it was like I was floating. I mean, it was crazy. I was so into that record, and realized I was going like 55 miles an hour, highly illegal on that stretch. I pulled the car over until it ended, and it was just like we weren't too into the Beatles, no offense, but I didn't get into that too much. My peers were more into obscure, weird British stuff and classical music. And then I heard this, and it was like speaking my language. But it was a hit. Not for long, a couple of weeks, but it was in the top 20 on WTOB. And I figured this was going to take over the country. It didn't, but it really took me over.
And at the time, you were playing in bands, and I think maybe Peter Holzapfel or Mitch Easter told me that you might have even been covering some of that stuff at the time, covering Big Star in their set in 1970.
Well, I went up to you couldn't really get the album. I went up to the WTOB and slipped the DJ $1, and he gave me the one of the 5 copies I'd gotten or something like that. And then I called up Ardent, and they were nice enough to start. I sent them $1 in the mail. They started sending me the singles as they came out in the different versions, and we would work them up. And I got a new Big Star single. It's like In the Street. There was a different version of that. I can't remember. And it was like we had found people who would speak for us. It was amazing.
And I want to bring in Ken and John in on this in a second, because obviously they know those songs so well. But one of the things that in the liner notes I did, it became, and this is when it started to become, first in North Carolina, then in Minnesota, Georgia, wherever people were hearing this record, it became kind of like a secret handshake. And in a way, maybe you even sort of judged people on how cool they were if they knew Big Star. Peter Holzapfel, who couldn't be here, tells a funny story about how he used it as a litmus test for his girlfriends. And that, in fact, one point he was going out with a girl who he sort of liked, and he put on, I think it was maybe Radio City, and she sort of said, this sounds like America with too much treble. At which point Peter Holzapfel said, get out.
It also influenced our sports life. We started a baseball team, and the anthem was September Girls, because of the line, when I get to bat late at night. I remember that.
It's an early sports anthem.
It's not the actual line. But.
So, John and Ken, let me ask you, obviously, you've been playing these songs for, 17 years, and kind of came to everybody's attention because, in the Big Star world, because you did covers. What is it when you go back and listen to that stuff and play that stuff? I mean, talk a little bit about the songs, and what is it for you guys to sort of be inside of them? And I don't know if they're different to you now, having played them, than when you first heard them.
Oh, geez. I mean, I think they're still as fresh as they ever were. I mean, it's funny too, people think the Posey's like